Welcome to the Future of Structures podcast, where we talk to the experts who are evolving our buildings for tomorrow. And here is your host, Adam Jones.
Today we had the opportunity of speaking with Sally Benson. So she's the Co-Director of the Precourt Institute for Energy, the Director of the Global Climate and Energy Project at Stanford, and a Professor of Energy Resources Engineering at Stanford. So there are a lot of changes happening in how we consume our energy with rapid advancement of existing technologies like solar, wind or batteries, and new technologies that we haven't even yet heard about. So there's no one better in the world to speak to than Sally in this space. So in this show we're going to talk about what our future electricity grid may consist of, the technology with the biggest upside that no one yet knows about, and the potential for carbon capture and storage, and a hell of a lot more. So I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. I had an absolute ball. And without any other further ado, here is Sally Benson.
So I'm Sally Benson. I am a professor of energy resources engineering here at Stanford University. I have been involved in energy and environmental research really my whole career. My earliest work was in geothermal energy, in particular in district heating systems using geothermal energy, and sort of evolving through carbon sequestration, negative emissions, and now I personally do a lot of work on energy systems analysis, trying to look at particularly sustainability metrics like carbon intensity or energy return on investment, to figure out what combinations of technologies are most likely to be able to lead us through the transition to a much more decarbonized energy system.
Yeah, cool.
So the key thing now, what I do is really work on decarbonization of the global energy system and trying to figure out ways to do that cost effectively and to accelerate the uptake of new technologies or systems of technologies. So that's kind of the snapshot about me.
Yeah. Awesome.
So maybe to say, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, and from the high level, what's this going to look like in the future, and what's holding the most promise? And is there any technologies that no one knows about that you guys are doing research on at the moment that holds a lot of promise?
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, I think undoubtedly, renewables are going to play a large role in the future, and there are really two main classes of technologies. One is, solar PV. I think will play a very huge and important role, and I think that wind turbines offer huge potential as well. But then, if you think about those two technologies, they're basically depending upon the weather, and in the future, I mean, I don't think we can expect that people will be willing to wait around until the weather is right to do all the things that they need to do with their that require energy. So the question then becomes, how do you firm those renewable energy supplies to provide 24/7 electricity and all of the other services that we need. So I think that carbon capture and sequestration is a key enabling technology that allows us to continue to take advantage of very well established technologies, natural gas turbines, combined cycle natural gas plants, in particular, and adding carbon capture and then sequestering the CO2. And I think that was going to be really important, both for firming electricity supplies, as well as thinking about things like cement making and steel making and aluminum making, things that we don't have good ideas of how to do without having the energy, the power density that's associated with fossil fuel use.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, how does that carbon capture and storage work if you broke it down to its kind of simplest form.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in its simplest form is that you burn fossil fuels just like we do today, but instead of allowing the carbon dioxide to go up into the atmosphere, you put on a chemical scrubber unit, which allows you to separate the carbon dioxide from nitrogen, which is the other main gas that comes out when you burn something. And that now you have carbon dioxide, and you can compress it into a liquid, so it's dense just like water, and then you can pump that into very deep underground geological formations, just like oil and gas reservoirs, and it will be retained there.
Yeah, awesome. So does that mean could you still burn something like coal? Because I know it. Probably hate to talk about it in Australia. There's talks of building a new coal mine. It's going to be Australia's biggest one. It's going to go online in 2020. So, can you use this technology for coal as well?
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that when this technology was first developed, everyone imagined it would be used largely or perhaps even exclusively on coal. So the way I look at it is that if you're burning coal, you certainly want to be using carbon capture and sequestration technology. So in the U.S., the context has changed a little bit in that we have so much natural gas and it's available at such a low cost that it's gotten harder and harder for coal to compete economically.
Yeah.
And so in the U.S., I think that certainly CO2 capture and storage for coal plants, but perhaps even more so for gas plants.
And say if you're in a developing country, so that coal mine I was talking about, they're exporting to India, so it's a developing country, so they're saying that it's cheaper for them. But is it cheaper for a developing country if they're building a grid from like the ground up to go with renewables, or is it easy for them to go with fossil fuels, do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way I like to think of the developing world context is that in well-developed economies, especially like California is a very good example. We are learning how to operate a grid with a lot of renewable energy on it, but it has a backbone of fossil fuels. And we know that can work pretty well if you have a capable operator of the electric grid. So I think as you think about developing economies which desperately need more energy, and they also desperately need reliable energy that is good enough so that you can run a factory, or that if you've got cold storage that you can really keep things cold. Or if you want to have some, industrial, if you want to make silicon, for example, for solar cells, that you've got the kind of reliable power that's needed to do that. So it's hard to imagine being able to build a productive and rapidly growing economy without that. And I see developing economy backbone, thinking about in the future decarbonizing that with CCS, but then having lots of renewables so that overall the carbon intensity of the energy system is comparatively low. But it does have the benefits of that kind of reliability that you can get with using fossil fuel generation.
Yeah. And say in the future, if we were to move to a predominantly renewable grid, what do you think might be able to be the best to replace baseload power that coal provides, or as you call it, backbones? What do you think is the best solution for that?
Yeah, I think what we're learning in the United States now is that the idea of sort of baseload power is, as you get to higher and higher penetrations of renewables, that the idea that you have certain generators that operate at a constant rate, 95% of the time or 90% of the time, that's just not what we see happening. We're seeing that there are, demands on our thermal generation units, our coal and gas, to actually ramp up and down. And many of the facilities that were initially sort of designed and conceived of as, baseload actually aren't operated that way. And even if you look at nuclear, I was speaking to somebody who is very involved in the nuclear power generation, and he was saying that actually for years that they've operated those nuclear plants flexibly, so that they ramp up and down. So I think that's the way we need to think of it. So we'll have some generating assets that can ramp up and down, perhaps not 100 to 0%, but operate flexibly within a band. We'll have lots of renewable generation, and then we'll have energy storage as well, which will be very useful for short-term fluctuations, like over the course of a day or maybe over the course of a couple days, that help balance everything out. So I see those as sort of the combination, and I think that every place will be different. It depends on your renewable, resource assets. It also depends on whether you have gas or coal, or if you have hydro. Hydro can provide very much the similar type of services to, a large thermal generator, in that you can, ramp it up and down, but it provides, a very reliable, dispatchable power.
Yeah.
So it's the sort of three key elements: the renewable, storage, and some kind of flexible, dispatchable generating units that are under your control.
Yeah, cool. And do you think there'll be like massive batteries as a possibility as well? Some of the things like Tesla are doing, they've come to Adelaide and employ these huge batteries that are, I think the biggest in the world at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I think that battery storage is going to be very important, maybe even hydrogen storage with, fuel cells to generate power will be important. I think we're at the beginning stages of that. And again, I think that batteries will be very useful for, sort of intraday, movement of, producing energy by solar during the middle of the day and then using it at night.
Yeah.
I think that it's going to be hard to imagine a system that will allow you to generate power in the summer and then store it long enough and at large enough quantities to, for example, use it in the winter. So seasonal energy storage, I think, we're a long way away from having good solutions for seasonal energy storage. And I think for that reason, thinking about how do you keep that flexible, dispatchable generation that's low carbon in the mix is important. And I think CCS can play an extremely important role in providing that.
Cool. And is there any other technologies that no one's heard about and they might be in the really early stages? Like I'm sitting on the Global Climate and Energy Project website now, and it says things like space energy technology redesign to make power stations more efficient, or future air conditioning could work by beaming heat into space. So there's these like science fiction. So I have a couple that I like a lot. So you mentioned one, basically beaming heat into space as a way of cooling. That's a very exciting technology. It's actually quite a big resource. It's not as big as the solar energy resource, but it's it's sort of on par with the wind energy resource. And it can operate, it can operate passively. Most likely you wouldn't operate it passively. You'd operate it with, fans and heat exchangers and so forth. But there's now a startup called SkyCool that is commercializing that technology, and their first market is to try to make air conditioning much more efficient. As with global climate change, it's going to be hotter with a growing middle class around the world. There's going to be more demand for cooling. So I think that anything that will help us tackle cooling is going to be hugely important. So that's one. Another one I really like is a technology that allows you to charge your car while you're driving down the road. Oh, wow.
So you know how there are like those buses that have they're connected to the wires and above the roadbeds. Well, it turns out that you could actually have cars where there are no wires, but you basically drive over magnetic induction coils, and every time you drive over one of those, it will give your car a little bit of a boost. And so, by the time you've finished your drive, you could have as much or more power or more energy available in your battery.
Wow.
So I think that's exciting, because I think electric cars are, I didn't talk about cars, but I think electric cars, their time has come. They're beautiful vehicles. They drive really nicely. They're getting more and more cost effective. So batteries are exciting, and the idea that you could get rid of all of the range anxiety issues by having, one or two lanes in a highway have these embedded charging coils is a very cool idea.
Yeah.
So that's another one I don't think people have really heard about.
Oh, definitely. It is almost science fiction, but a lot of things that 10 years ago we'd say was science fiction, some of those things are here today, so who knows what in 10 years what things might look like.
Yeah, and I'll give you one more, and this one's sort of farther out than those other two that I just mentioned, but it's now possible to take renewable energy and carbon dioxide and water and take all of those components and basically make liquid fuels, like you could make ethanol as an example, and that will be absolutely game changing, because the minute that we can do that, we can actually start thinking about seasonal energy storage, and we can start thinking about a really practical way to get fuels that could be used, for example, in airplanes. Or in ships, things that are really hard to decarbonize. So I think that's the third hugely impactful area. Yeah. And there are many different approaches, and again, they're making real progress. They can now make these things in the lab.
Oh, wow. So do you think, so how long has the third one been developing, and it's probably a hard question to say, how long to potentially see it, but yeah, I mean, on a commercial scale, that one is harder, because right now it would be very expensive to do, and it's not very efficient. But again, it can be done, and so I mean, if we look historically at how long things have taken, like if we look at photovoltaic cells, or we look at wind turbines, or we look at electric cars, things tend, to start to really scale up, where they get to the point where they're inexpensive enough that, maybe a couple decades is sort of typical of what we've seen from the time it's a glimmer in somebody's eye to the time when you really start to see, companies manufacturing these things at scale. And do you see with some of the research and the startups from the Global Climate and Energy Project, other technologies like artificial intelligence being utilised to, I guess, make, disrupt a market or make a whole new commercial product? Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we absolutely are. So in all of these things like hydrogen production, or making batteries, or in making, fuels from renewable energy, that it all requires finding the perfect material, or a very good material, basically synthesizing that doesn't exist in nature but has the perfect properties. And historically, that's been done either by trial and error, or in some cases, it's done based on theory. But those things can be slow and inefficient. So now there are quite a lot of people interested in using things like machine learning to figure out how do you narrow the range of materials that might work.
and then you can do the detailed theoretical work. So that's one example that I think is really exciting. There's also work on trying to understand, how batteries fail, and again using, machine learning to try to diagnose and predict, lifetimes of batteries and that kind of thing.
Yeah, awesome.
So it's really, I think, poised to have a very big impact.
Yeah, cool. And when you were in Melbourne and I saw you do a presentation, you were talking about the payback time for solar and batteries. Can you just give a brief overview of what you found and why this research needed to be done?
Right. So one of the big questions when you introduce a completely new energy technology is that every device we build and operate, for that matter, but really to build, it takes a lot of energy to build those devices. Like to make a solar cell, you have to basically take rocks like beach sand, and then you have to drive off the oxygen, and you do that by heating it up to very high temperatures. And so you basically need to purify it, and then the next thing you do after you purify it is you need to, again, heat it up to, super high temperatures and let it crystallize. And then you need to saw it into little slices. I mean, there's so many steps. So it actually takes a lot of energy to build these things.
Yep.
So the question is, well, do you actually get more energy out of this device over its lifetime than it took to build it? And so this is a question that people have been debating actually for quite a long time, is, well, how much beneficial value do you get from PV? So we did some work, and it basically showed that PV cells produce much more energy over their lifetime than it took to build them. So that was awesome. That was the good news. So then we decided to look at energy storage technologies to see like batteries in particular, but also we've looked at fuel cells and hydrogen.
Yep.
And asked that same question, and what we found there is that those two are actually very energetically intensive to build. So if you build a system that is combined with a PV cell and a battery, that compared to just having, say, photovoltaic electricity that you either use or put back on the grid, by the time you've built a battery and so forth, you only get kind of half the beneficial value of the whole system because of all the energy it took to build both the panel and the battery.
Yeah.
But having said that, it's still pretty darn good. Yeah, it's only in the worst. It's only in the worst of locations where these things really don't make sense. And if you look at a sunny country like Australia, that's really an ideal country in many ways for solar, using Definitely. Solar energy.
And with the and I think I'm jumping around a bit. I'll do that a little bit sometimes. But with the trends in solar, do you see the efficiency and cost? What kind of curve is this on? Is it diminishing returns where it's going to hit a peak at how cheap it can get, or do you see it kind of following kind of a Moore's law kind of curve where it's getting exponentially cheaper? Or what do you see in the future with solar?
Yeah. I think we expect kind of Moore's law kind of improvement. So as you're first, scaling up and perfecting, manufacturing, the prices tumble very quickly. But at some point, you do sort of hit these points of diminishing returns, and that doesn't mean you don't stay on Moore's law. It just means that basically Moore's law for solar says that you basically, for every time you double production, the costs are going to drop 18% or so.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
once you have a really big system, you have to produce a lot more panels to get that 18% reduction.
Yep. Awesome.
But I think there's no reason to believe that progress in solar would stall out or anything else.
Yeah. Awesome. So as we I guess get toward the end, so what are you most excited about in the future? In it doesn't have to just be your field. It could be about anything that will affect the buildings industry. It could be energy.
Uh-huh. I think that thinking about integrated systems, trying to become far more efficient, not just at all the components, but for how all the bits fit together. And I'll give a specific example. So on our campus, we used to have a cogen plant, that produced both electricity and heat.
Yep.
And at some point, about 5 years ago, we decided it was old, so we needed to replace it. But we said, well, what if we do something else? And we got this idea that we could have basically a district heating system for the campus and a district cooling system. Mm. And by this system that we installed, we were actually able to reduce overall energy demand by about 70%, which is really enormous.
It's crazy.
And yeah, it's really crazy, and and all the carbon benefits, carbon reduction benefits that you get with that. Mm. And so that was done, and so now what we're working on is we're saying, okay, well, we've got this large system here. We've got, say, 20 megawatts that's running this district heating and cooling system. Maybe we can start offering services to the grid. So one of the beneficial things, if you can either increase your demand or decrease your demand to make the grid operate reliably and stably, maybe we can use, our large ability to drop load or increase load by helping provide these grid services, and we get compensated for doing that. Mm. So that's even, yet a larger systems integration.
Yeah.
So I think I'm most excited about the potential for large-scale systems integration to achieve really revolutionary improvements in efficiency.
Yeah. Awesome. And I've got a kind of similar question, but subtly different. And what do you think will have the biggest impact on the buildings industry in the future?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'm kind of guessing that it's something like how people use them, sort of like the future of work and in this sort of highly connected, information-rich world, where resources, we need to steward very carefully. Are we going to need, so many office buildings, and maybe we'll do a lot more things virtually, or maybe we can deal with smaller spaces and just try to be much more efficient in how we use the building stock. So really, sort of the interaction between people and infrastructure.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Cool. And if people want to find out more about your research and some of the work you're doing, where can they find you?
I think that at Stanford University, either through the Precourt Institute or the Global Climate and Energy Project, or I also have my own individual web page just under, I think it's Benson Lab at Stanford.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sally. That was absolutely phenomenal.
Okay. Well, great to talk with you.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of your day, and that'll this will go live in about end of January sometime or early Feb.
Okay.
And
great.
I'll send you an email and with all the links and that. So yeah.
Marvelous. Okay. Well, thanks so much. I'm glad we had a chance to talk.
Hey guys, Adam here. Just before you go, just one quick request. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a review. It helps our rating and ranking on iTunes so more people can hear from the people who are making our cities better places for our future.